everyone, and welcome to another Movie Importance Flashback Reviews, where I take movies from the past, break them down, and tell you what I think about them. If you like what you see, of course, hit the subscribe button, join Movie Emporium, hit that notification bell top to find what's coming next, and comment below on any videos you watch, including this one. So, 35 years ago this week, July 3rd, 1985 to be exact, little known film, Back to the Future, was released in the theaters. To say that this film was defining of a genre, defining of filmmaking is an understatement. This movie is as classic as it comes. To define a genre like the sci-fi genre, to define the genre like the comedy drama, just doesn't happen a lot of times. And when you have a double whammy of this and Ghostbusters coming out within a year apart of one another, it just shows you the 80s were a pretty spectacular time to watch movies. It really was. And Back to the Future is what I consider one of the greatest comedies of all time. It's one of my favorites. I watch it several times a year. And it's because it's so watchable. There's nothing wrong about this movie outside of a few kind of uncomfortable situations. This movie is almost as pitch perfect as it comes. You know, you have Robert Zemeckis, who is the director, who's coming off a huge hit with Romancing in the Stone. You have Bob Gale, who basically wrote this story because he wanted he always imagined himself what it would be like living with, in the same time frame as his, father when he was younger, as a class president and stuff like that. You have Steven Spielberg, who's a pretty big producer at this time. And you have a production history that is almost as interesting as the movie itself. And the fact that this movie just works as well as it does is a pretty incredible thing if you think about it. But this movie was the biggest movie of 1985. It made like $260 to $280 million, and it greenlit a couple sequels, which I've talked about already. And it's kind of funny because I've kind of gone from the second film to the third film. It's just because of the anniversaries. And this movie also has some of the most ingenious casting of all time. Michael J. Fox was originally cast to take this role, but because of Family Ties, which was hugely successful at the time, he could not do it, which makes a lot of sense. You're under contract, those types of things happen. And so they brought Eric Stoltz in, and Eric Stoltz, of course, is very famous for having to drop out or being fired from the project because he took the role a little too self-serious, and he knows it. And he talked to Peter Bogdanovich, who actually he worked with on Mask. Peter Bogdanovich directed that. And I think the fact that they were able to work with Family Ties to get Michael J. Fox to come back for the role is probably one of the greatest casting choices and greatest casting wins in the history, because this movie, you can't see it without Michael J. Fox in the role. I mean, Marty McFly, who is one of the greatest comedic characters in history, his timing, his way he has to deal with everything, the fact that he is a kid who comes from a family who's a bunch of losers, basically. His uncle's in jail, his mom is a downtrodden woman, his father is a geeky, gets picked on by Biff still, and he goes back in time after a mishap with Iranian terrorists and Doc Brown being killed, and he goes back and course corrects everything without realizing what he's doing, because the way things work out is his father was supposed to fall out of the tree, and the mother falls in love with the father, but instead he is hit by the car and the mother weirdly falls in love with him, and in the process he has to go through the steps and motions to figure out how to fix the problem with the help of a very much younger Doc Brown. And just the idea of that is really weird if you think about it, because there's a lot of ancestral things going on with that. But having what Michael J. Fox is having to deal with in this movie, and how he is, stepping up to the task, the things he is, put upon himself, and the things he has to deal with, it's fantastic. It really is. I mean, just the ideas of what Michael J. Fox was doing and how he was handling the situation. The fact that in the end, he did what, Back to the Future Part 2, when Doc Brown's talking about the almanac, he created an alternate timeline, which actually made Biff a more sympathetic character, made his parents a more, headstrong type of bunch of characters, rich, and, they are more able to talk and be more in line with, the headstrong nature. And it's just a fun character arc, and it's an interesting thing when you go back and think about it, because there's still that universe where Michael J. Fox has basically disintegrated himself because of the whole parent situation, so he's no longer around, but he's created that alternate timeline and so on and so forth. And then you have the other side of the casting of Christopher Lloyd. Now, Jeff Goldblum was apparently cast, or he was considered for this role, and that would have been pretty incredible to think about in its own right. But once again, like Michael J. Fox, you can't see anyone else playing this role but Christopher Lloyd. And it's because of his manic nature of being that quack scientist, the one that has like the very outrageous, very chaotic nature to how his mannerisms, how he does things, the fact that he's like always freaking out, the fact that he actually had the gall to steal plutonium from a bunch of Iranian terrorists, and he gave him a bomb that had shoddy pinball machine parts, is just the amazing character stuff that is known, what Doc Brown is known for. And to see him have to come to grips in terms of this kid who has come back from the future, to having to deal with that, to having him to get him back to the future, there's nothing greater than having, I don't even know if you can consider Doc Brown a sidekick. He is like the equal pairing to Marty McFly. But the chemistry between the two, the chemistry of what Doc Brown's manic personality to, Marty McFly's more teen, more just, I don't know what to do. It works so well. Every moment that they're in this movie together is like kind of comedic gold. There's no part in everything from when Doc Brown is finally introduced with the time machine to the idea of the gigawatt stuff to the model set stuff to the eventual conclusion where they're having to get Marty McFly back into the future. It just works, to see the looks and the feels of how they're playing each other, playing off each other is pretty incredible. And that's why this movie is such a revelation of filmmaking, because you get two actors that are so completely different that they work so well together. And I think that's what made it such a great pairing. That's considered one of the great pairings of all time. And you look at Rick and Morty, they're almost complete carbon copies of Marty and of course Doc Brown, but that's Rick and Morty. But this movie also has a great supporting cast in general. I mean, we have Llyod Thompson, who plays Lorraine Baines McFly, or Lorraine Baines throughout the most of the movie. And it's his mom, Marty McFly's mom. And I think Llyod Thompson is perfect in this role. She's like really innocent, but really promiscuous, really goofy, really just kind of over the top in her actions towards Marty McFly. When you get older, as you start watching this movie, we've all watched this movie a billion times as kids, but when you start seeing the underlying themes that are going on with this movie, it can get really quite uncomfortable, because she's literally hitting on her son. She's literally having feelings for her son, and the conventional conclusion, and they talk about this in like the documentaries and stuff like that, about how that kiss that she plants on Marty, and she says you it's like kissing my brother, it really sets the tone of how insane this storyline is, because Lorraine is just a teenager having teenager emotions, but she doesn't realize the fact that she's in this insane sci-fi comedy where her son has gone back and screwed up everything and has to fix everything, and he has to kind of take advantage of his mother. It's really kind of crazy stuff if you think about it, and really kind of strange, intense, and just bonkers nonsense, but it is so good. You actually have so many great moments, like the Calvin Klein underwear scene, or the dinner scene where Marty's seeing his grandparents and stuff like that, to the car sequence, to everything that she's involved with. She's not like the most major character in the movie, but she's one of the most important characters because of what Marty McFly has to do. And then on the other side, you have Crispin Glover. Now, it's very well known. He actually talked on, I think, the Schmoes Know. He's been talking about a bunch of places about how tumultuous his relationship with Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale eventually became. But he's one of the standout characters. I mean, this is a movie of standout characters to begin with. But he plays George McFly, and George McFly at the beginning of this movie is a loser. He has the pocket protector, he has the glasses, he eats peanut brittle, he smells. His family doesn't respect him, and so on and so forth. And he's the character that gets the most trajectory of character arc, because he is the one that actually basically turns and alternates time in general, because at first, he's sitting around, he misses the moment where he falls in love with Lorraine with the whole car sequence. And he is big in the writing, he's big in the, sci-fi fiction, and Marty McFly kind of eases himself into his life to kind of get him back on course correcting to finally get to Lorraine so that Marty McFly doesn't disappear. But the biggest thing about George McFly is he has to stand up to Biff, and he doesn't do that in the original timeline. But when the uncomfortable sequence of Biff almost raping Lorraine, it's another sequence I don't really understand why it had to be in the movie, but it's important because that sequence changes everything. And Marty McFly is kind of eking his, his ego and his brain to kind of turn and become a bigger, more self-reliant person. And the moment that George McFly hits Biff changes everything. It's actually the most important thing in the movie outside of, just Marty McFly getting back to the future, because it takes Lorraine into a different sphere of, oh my god, this guy is amazing, to when he actually stands up to the nerdish guy who, he's walking away from Lorraine as the nerdish guy takes over, and he just knocks the guy over. And then he kisses Lorraine, everything changes, everything's good with Marty McFly and so on and so forth. And when we go to the future, when Marty McFly wakes up, his parents are rich, they just came back from tennis, his father is a famous author, and it completely changes what Marty McFly's life is like. And that one punch actually basically changed everything. It changed the fact that Biff is now a mechanic or whatever he is. If it weren't for Back to the Future Part 2, everything would be a very interesting look into a very swapped universe. And that's why I go into the whole almanac thing. I think that's a ingenious moment in Back to the Future Part 2. But he is, in essence, the most important character in the movie, because if it weren't for him punching Biff or kissing Lorraine, there would be no more Marty McFly. Marty McFly screwed up. He needed George to do this, to fix the universe, to course correct everything. But he also course corrected it for the better. So, Crispin Glover and his mannerisms have been talked about, how a lot of stuff he did throughout the movie was his own kind of, ideas, the whole shifting of fingers and stuff like that was his idea and so on and so forth. But I never really thought about that until I was watching it, this last time. George McFly is seriously the most important character in the movie. Like, he really is. It's amazing that it isn't Marty or isn't Doc Brown, it's George McFly. So there you go. Now, the other major character in this movie, of course, is Thomas F. Wilson, who plays Biff. And Biff, of course, is the bully. He's the one that is going to do some pretty crazy stuff. He's the one that, in the beginning of this movie, has, what Lorraine and, of course, George had at the end. But he's just an a-hole. He's the guy that is going to do something bad eventually. He's going to get himself in trouble. And I love Thomas F. Wilson in this movie. Like, he's an incredible character. Yeah, he does some despicable stuff near the end, but he gets his comeuppance. How intense his character is. How, for instance, Lou's Diner sequence with the whole manure stuff is just, that sequence just really shows the range of how good Thomas F. Wilson is in this entire series in general, but just his character alone, you really feel like he's a great antagonist, and he does a really nice job with what he has. As little screen time he is in this movie, but he also has like three great, like almost cohorts or like minions, I guess you could say, and they're of course played by Billy Zane, J.J. Cohen, and Casey Siemasko. Billy Zane, of course, known for Titanic. Casey Siemasko is actually quite famous in acting in universe. J.J. Cohen, which I just read, was apparently the original Biff before they let him go, but they at least gave him some roles. He was in a couple other Back to the Future movies and so on and so forth. But once again, Biff is like the catalyst for George course correcting everything. It's just, when you have characters like that are able to kind of play well off the main characters and be evil, but be, the way through the keyhole or the way through the Wonderland, he's a great villain. I mean, he really is. He's, the typical bully, but his charisma, his drive, his mannerisms is just, there's something great about what Thomas F. Wilson's doing here. Like I said, the whole almost rape sequence in this movie is a little kind of uncomfortable and kind of, it shouldn't have been in the movie, but it has that catalyst moment, so it's not too bad. It's not the worst thing I've ever seen, but it is a little gross. I don't understand, but I mean, they could have figured out other ways to do this movie, but there you go. Now, of course, James Tolkan as the principal is a lot of fun in this movie. You know, he is what he is. It's just he's that like guy who's very stern and very, you're gonna follow the rules and stuff like that. And James Tolkan, like I talked about in Dick Tracy, he's just a fun actor to watch in these movies. He has a lot of great moments. The whole like five tardiness thing is a lot of fun, and how he's like talking about Doc Brown to Marty McFly and stuff like that. But with that said, we have the brother and sister of Marty McFly. They're a lot of fun. The sister unfortunately passed away. They're not really given much to do. They're just there to show you the transition from when they become, the kind of underlining family to the rich family that they eventually become, the successful family. And of course, we get to see the grandparents who we never see in the original timeline. We get to see them with the kids and so on and so forth. And just like their small characters, Lou is a lot of fun. He's the owner of Lou's Cafe. Red Thomas, who is the mayor in 1955, was played by a real life porn actor who we see in the 1985 version as a homeless guy. The band, I think it's like Marvin Berry and the Starlighters, who we learned that Marvin Berry is Chuck Berry's father or brother or cousin or something like that. And it's really funny because that whole guitar sequence is, I think, Chuck Berry's Johnny Be Good. And it's really funny to see it play off like, hey, Chuck, here's your song being played, and I think you should go with this, even though they don't know it's his song because he hasn't created it yet. It just, those characters and how they interact with one another, like even the small supporting characters have such great moments. Some of my some of my favorite characters are the Marvin Berry and the Starlighters or whatever they're called, because they're just like characters that just drive around and play for high schools. And because it's 1955 and because they're African American, they're not treated very well, but they're treated with dignity because of how good they are at what they do. And to see Marty play with them and do Johnny Be Good is just, it's one of my favorite moments in the movie. But there's a lot of great moments in this. There's a lot of great moments in this movie. It starts off with like the power of love stuff with, Marty going to basically Doc Brown's, I guess it's a garage now. It used to be part of his house before it caught on fire. He uses the amp, which catches, explodes, to the time travel stuff at Twin Pines Mall, which becomes Lone Pines Mall, to the, the farmer, the farmer, whatever they're called, the farmer pine or whatever they're called. And the whole miscommunication of they think it's a spaceship, to the whole sequence with the skateboard stuff, to the eventual conclusion where we have one of the most tense sequences in like movie making history, where basically Doc is trying to get Marty McFly back. They have to use the whole clock tower with the lightning bolt stuff, and the cable connector loosens and falls apart, and Doc Brown has to go to the top, and it's very reminiscent of Harold Lloyd, and is falling off the the clock thing. But that whole sequence until the point when he gets connected, he actually electrocutes himself as the lightning's flowing down into when Marty eventually is able to hit 88 miles an hour and go to the future. It's just a really well done sequence that is just so intense and so mesmerizing, and so just you're on the edge of your seat every time you watch it. There's not very many movies that it doesn't matter how many times you watch it, there's that sequence that is going to get your heart racing, is going to get you to the moment. It's like, is Marty going to get to the future? Is he going to get back to his own time? Because he has this one shot without stealing plutonium, and yeah, he does it. And it's a great sequence. I love it. I love everything about it. I love that Marty's trying to help Doc, and Doc doesn't want anything to do with it. I like the fact that Doc, of course, he decides, yeah, you know what, you're right, I learned about my future, we'll fix this, and he lives at the end of the movie, and that's why we get Back to the Future Part 2 and 3. But yeah, it's there's so much great stuff in this movie, and I didn't even talk about the production because I wanted to talk about that last, to be honest. And this production is insane because when it comes to movies like this, and you look at like Star Wars, and I think you actually look at Jaws and so on and so forth, it's amazing. It still happens today how movies that have very successful backgrounds in the end have been passed around from studio to studio to studio. Star Wars is infamous for the idea nature of, oh, we're not doing a space opera, that sounds stupid. Obi-Wan Kenobi, laser swords, what the hell is this? And it's the same thing with Back to the Future, And the crazy thing about this is Spielberg, Zemeckis, and Gale had worked with each other before on Used Cars and I Want to Hold Your Hand, but they were both bombs, box office bombs. It even says it in the Wikipedia. It says that, it's the big thing about Robert Zemeckis. And then they tried for 4 or 5 years to get this movie made, this Back to the Future movie made, as things do, the script changes and so on and so forth. And no studio wanted it. No, nobody wanted it. It took Columbia Pictures with Frank Price, who was working at Columbia Pictures at the time, to even get this movie looked at. And on top of that, Romancing the Stone is what really gave this movie life, because as we know, Romancing the Stone was a huge, gigantic hit. It really was. It was well received. It put Robert Zemeckis on the map. And so the fact that they went from studio to studio, Disney being Disney, saw the incestuous stuff, and they had nothing wanted to do with it. They went to Fox and so on and so forth. Like I said, it was picked up in Columbia Pictures, and then went in turnaround, which means that they're going to not do the film. They're going to just leave it in kind of a development hell for a while. Frank Price went over to Universal with Sid Sheinberg, who was over there, who actually worked with Spielberg. Spielberg actually helped Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale get this film made. And the funny part was Sid Sheinberg, of course, wanted changes, because Sid Sheinberg was a big cheese. And of course, the entertainment industry, were working at Universal, had a lot of big projects come through there. And he wanted this movie called Spaceman from Mars or something like that. And he wanted all these changes, and it took Spielberg and a lot of coercing to get this movie to be called Back to the Future, because there was no love for a name called Back to the Future. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. You're going back to the future and you're going past. It's just a really weird title. But with that said, the movie got a $14 million budget. They got their cast eventually. Well, before, it had Eric Stoltz and a couple other actors. Eric Stoltz, like I said, he was not working. They had shot like 6 weeks of filming already, and they had to go back and spend another $3 million to bring back Michael J. Fox. And it became like a crazy production history. The movie was cost $14 million. There's a lot of visual effects in this movie that are very revolutionary. The idea of this time travel movie, and they decided to release it on July 4th weekend. That is a huge weekend for movies. You look at the Will Smith era of like when he was making like huge movies, and they were all released on July 4th. It was just that type of weekend. And Sid Sheinberg and Spielberg and Frank Price and Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale had so much faith that this movie was going to be successful that they released it in a prime spot. What they didn't realize, and what nobody realizes, look at Star Wars, is this movie became a cultural phenomenon. Not only did it become a cultural phenomenon, it became an important film in the history. It was one of the first films to be introduced into the National Registry. And it's an incredible thing to watch, because this movie is so brilliant just in its ideas and logic and reasoning. Yes, time travel is a very weird thing to delve into, but when this movie made as much money as it did, it became one of the greatest success stories of all time. It's not the biggest, budget to money making, but for 1985, making $200+ million, that's a pretty big deal. And it put Michael J. Fox, who was already on the map from stuff like Teen Wolf and Family Ties, but Christopher Lloyd, who had done a lot of stuff like, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and of course, Taxi, and it put all these actors on the map, and just became something totally revolutionary for what it's worth. And it jump started a franchise, which is a $1 billion franchise. It gave us a theme park ride. Like I said, I've already talked about the other two movies, so I'll link them in the the ending sequence, whatever. But yeah, I mean, then they got Alan Silvestri to do the score. The score is iconic. You know it. You can hear it in your mind. Huey Lewis did a couple of like really great songs. I think actually The Power of Love was nominated for an Oscar, if I remember right, but he also did Back in Time. Really memorable stuff. Claudia Wells, who plays Jennifer, unfortunately she got replaced by Elizabeth Shue. It's hard to just not talk about how successful this movie was and how ingenious it was. And I keep saying that, but it really was. Like I said, there's never a time where I can't go back and just not want to watch this movie. And I go back and forth between this movie and Ghostbusters as what is the greatest comedy of all time. There is a big debate which is one of the greatest comedies of all time, this or Ghostbusters. And I think that just shows you the power of this movie in a whole, in a nutshell, and the fact that this gave Robert Zemeckis almost unlimited power to do whatever he wanted from here on out. Once again, it just shows you the Spielberg magic. This is a touch of gold. It's a lightning in a bottle. The trailer, which shows nothing but Michael J. Fox at the beginning, just saying, "Get ready to rev up to go to 88" or whatever it is. It defies the idea of what filmmaking can be. And the fact that it had its tumultuous history it's pretty incredible stuff. So I mean, it is what it is, but it's Back to the Future. It's one of the greatest films of all time and one of the greatest comedies of all time. So there you go. But that's pretty much it. That's what I have on Back to the Future. Like I said, we've all seen this movie. If you haven't, I don't know why you haven't, but you should definitely go back and watch it because it's an incredible piece of filmmaking. So there you go. That is my take on Back to the Future. Happy 35th anniversary. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this movie. Did you like it? Did you not like it? What if you do like it? What is your favorite scene in this movie? There are so many. I didn't even go into all the scenes because there's so much good stuff in this movie to talk about. But also, if you like this video, hit the like button. If you disliked it, you know it is what it is. But otherwise, hit the subscribe button to join Movie Emporium and the notification bell at the top to find out what's coming next. Otherwise, we'll see you guys on the next video. Peace out. What's up, guys? Thank you so much for checking out Movie Emporium. I really appreciate it. If you want to, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification button and the bell at the top. Find out what's coming next for Movie Emporium. Also, check out these 2 videos. They're amazing. I think they're awesome. I think you'll enjoy them too. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.